Hello, and thank you for tuning into the Texas Women's Foundation podcast, Strong Women, Better Texas, where we'll discuss topics that impact the lives of women, girls, and families across our state, and how we can individually and collectively create solutions to build stronger women and create a better Texas. I'm Karen Hughes White, President and CEO of Texas Women's Foundation. Our mission is to drive meaningful social and economic change for women, girls, and families statewide by leveraging our resources to invest in research, advocacy, grant making, and leadership training to support our vision of an equitable society where women and girls can fully participate. We're kicking off this podcast with our first series, The State of Women in Texas. In this series, we'll be sounding the alarm on some of the most concerning issues and statistics about the realities facing women, girls, and families in Texas. These findings explain why Texas ranks 47th out of 50 states for women's overall economic success and well-being. How is this possible in a state with one of the largest and most robust economies in the nation? Well, stay tuned. You're about to find out. Joining me today is Gloria Blackwell, Chief Executive Officer for the American Association of University Women, better known as AAUW. AAUW is one of the largest funders of graduate women's education, and since 1881 has provided $146 million in fellowships, grants, and awards to more than 14,000 women from 152 countries. In addition to her role as CEO, Gloria is also AAUW's main representative to the United Nations. Gloria has been a driving force behind AAUW's signature programs, including its salary negotiation trainings, which have reached nearly 190,000 trainings nationwide. She has worked on pay equity initiatives with public officials in Washington, D.C., New York, Boston, and Pittsburgh, as well as with numerous other state and municipal partners. In this episode of our podcast, we're going to discuss the issue of the persistent and pervasive wage gap. Continues to be a driving force for women's economic insecurity here in Texas. And we'll talk with Gloria about the great work AAUW is doing to combat this issue. So Gloria, hello. Thank you for joining us today.
Hello, Karen, and thank you so much for having me on your show today. I'm so glad to be here, and I want to say a special shout out to our AAUW members there in Texas. AAUW has members in every state across the U.S., as well as the territories in Puerto Rico and Guam. It's really an honor to join you all here and share this very important topic with everyone who's here, and of course, our members. AAUW is focused on higher education as an avenue for pay equity and economic security. But as you know, we are still seeing major gaps in pay despite a higher level of degree attainment. This often leads to incorrect assumptions that there is no longer a pay gap. So I really want to say thank you to this Texas Women's Foundation for doing the really important research that shows that the pay gap is not a myth. There is a clear and convincing data that the gender pay gap is not a myth, but rather a pernicious problem that undermines the economic security of Texas families.
You're absolutely right, Gloria. And I think, this is our fifth report, our 10th year of conducting this research. The wage gap came up a little differently this year and stood out in a big way because the research was cast through the lens of the Texas workforce. And that led us to a lot of data that is shocking and kind of confounding, right? Similar to the statistics you shared, right? We're finding that Texas women are earning 1.4 times the college degrees, right? Speaking about persistence and attainment, than their male counterparts. Yet we've got really shocking data, right, that we'll get into. So I want to say personally, right, as a working woman, thank you for your work in advancing equity for women and girls. across the globe, right? So let's dig in, right? As you said, pay inequity long been a challenge for women. Again, according to our report this year, that's the Economic Issues for Women in Texas report, and the current population survey here in Texas. Women working full time, year round, earn just 83% of what their male counterparts make. And that's a decline from our previous year's research, which indicated it was just a percentage point higher. Now, that gap is even wider when you disaggregate the data and get to women of color. So tell me from your seat, right, what do you think are the contributing factors that are driving the persistence of a wage gap?
Such a great way to start the conversation because AAUW's research has shown that the gender pay gap cannot simply be attributed to differences in education, occupation, or time out of the workforce. Obviously, there are multiple contributing causes, which are a combination of systemic, cultural, and individual factors. For example, gendered expectations actually start quite early and they shape people's paths, influencing their educational and their career opportunities. Another important factor really is the devaluing of women's credentials and expertise. AUW is committed to higher education for women. And although women, as you mentioned, earned higher educational credentials than men across the board, the skills and qualifications in female dominated fields are often undervalued in terms of pay. In addition, women are offered lower initial salaries. They're less likely to negotiate their salaries. And when they do, they may face backlash due to gendered stereotypes about assertiveness. So the challenges are, certainly even more complex for women of color, the LGBTQ plus individuals, women with disabilities, right, who face compounded inequities and workplace pervasive biases and discriminatory practices certainly further cement these pay disparities. And as you mentioned, for the first time in decades, overall, the national pay gap has widened. In 2023, women working full time, right, we know earned 83% of what men earned, which is a decline from the previous year. Certainly, this is not a trend that any of us want to see continuing. And I think it's important to note that when COVID hit, Black and Latino women experienced much higher rates of unemployment. They're still feeling the impact. And this is also the same group of women who are disproportionately in lower wage jobs. And as our economy continues its recovery, these groups continue to face an even larger pay gap, which highlights the structural and economic inequalities across our country.
Absolutely. So you've touched on societal norms, right, and the role that plays here. Um, I would suggest, right, and I think you'd agree, unconscious bias factors into this. It's at play, right? How do you feel like unconscious bias influences the issues tied to equal pay?
So I think there's just so many overlapping issues that contribute to the pay gap. Unconscious bias is certainly a really important one. But I also feel that, two issues that I think affect the women of Texas are important to lift up, and that's job segregation and direct discrimination. Unconscious bias, it really is a part of our workplace. It's a part of our educational system. And what it does is it perpetuates women's inability to move forward and move past the ways in which certain topics or certain assumptions are made about women. So when we think about what may be impacting women in Texas in particular around job segregation, direct discrimination. With job segregation, research shows us that, as I mentioned, Black and Latino women are more likely to be in those lower paying occupations, more likely to be underrepresented in higher paying male dominated fields, right, like engineering and technology. And so part of that that's also important is that women dominated jobs are also less likely to offer benefits like paid time off, health insurance, and retirement plans. And so, in particular, when you're thinking about what is impacting the women of Texas, I think that's really important to lift up. And I think secondly, the direct discrimination is really important because direct discrimination and bias against women in the workplace are really also important culprits in the pay gap, which are, of course, compounded for women of color, because there are so many deeply ingrained stereotypes about gender roles, which unfortunately perpetuate these unequal expectations for men and women in the workplace, including assumptions about competence, assumptions about ambition. And that is also along the same lines of what happens with unconscious bias, right? And women are less likely to be promoted into high paying leadership roles. We all know about the glass ceiling effect, right? And
Absolutely.
unfortunately, every year, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, or the EEOC, receives thousands of sex, race, and other pay discrimination complaints. So we know that it is happening for women across the job spectrum.
Well, and I think it is, right? Absolutely. And I think what lifts this up even further, right, is the increasing number of women who are becoming heads of households, right?
Yes.
Participating in the workforce in greater numbers, but also with greater need and purpose, right? We've learned in Texas that women actually make up 46% of our state's workforce, which closely aligns with the national figure. But it demonstrates that women really are a vital force, a driving force in both Texas as a state, right, and the national economy, right? Texas likes to boast a $2.4 trillion economy, the strongest in the nation. And there's been some comparison of Texas, if it were a country, that we'd have a larger economy than countries like Australia and Russia. Right. But women, in point of fact, are joining the workforce here in Texas at much higher rates, more than 1 million over the last 10 years. And based on the roles they hold, they are driving a lot of innovation, right? Again, bolstering the economy here. But our research also reveals that because of the persistent wage gap, it actually is penalizing this state by a staggering $47 billion in lost earnings and productivity, right? Economic output, right? Annually. So when you start to consider these numbers, right, what do you see as the business case, as if the numbers don't make them, right? But how would you articulate the business case for closing the pay gap once and for all?
Those are just amazing statistics, right? And they provide such an amazing sort of landscape of what we are all facing. So, if all women received equal pay for work of equal value, there certainly would be a significant benefit to families, to businesses, and obviously to our states and our economy as a whole. And companies have been increasingly aware that closing the gender pay gap is a win-win. It's a win-win business strategy because it really helps businesses attract and retain staff. When workers feel valued, that the pay they are receiving is fair, it can foster a higher level of commitment. It can foster increased productivity. It can certainly foster increased revenue. In contrast, employees who feel undervalued can lead to high turnover, which can certainly be costly to businesses. So, pay equity would mean that women and families would have more money to spend on food, on housing, education, potentially even on leisure, right? So this benefits the local economy both directly and obviously through increased tax revenue, for example. Women would also be better supported to pay off student loan debt more quickly and also invest in retirement. Both are areas in which they're disproportionately impacted at a much higher and much more negative rate than men. So it would be a win-win for businesses overall.
Well, and it's an issue, right, with lots of tentacles and really a gigantic ripple effect, right? And so, with that context, let's talk about the ways we can address it, right? And AAUW certainly has been at the forefront of tackling this challenge for some time. One of your key initiatives is providing salary negotiation training for women nationwide. And I am familiar with these programs. I am a fan of these programs. They're necessary and they work. So, could you share more with our listeners today about these programs and how they're empowering women in the workforce?
Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here with a cheerleader and a fan of our salary negotiation
Absolutely.
programs, right? And as I mentioned earlier, women are less likely to negotiate their salaries, and when they do, right, they may face backlash due to gendered stereotypes about assertiveness. Men are often offered higher starting salaries and larger raises, which obviously will compound over time to more income. So currently, AEW does offer salary negotiation trainings to our college and university partners and our AAUW members. By joining AEW as an individual member or higher ed institution, you can actually gain access to incredibly practical, actionable strategies that empower you to take charge of your career and, of course, your financial future. So our programs have trained over 190,000 women to negotiate their salary, but also to negotiate benefits and even to negotiate promotions. Um, and I'm proud to say I've trained thousands of women and men myself through those programs. So the two trainings specifically that we offer are AAUW Work Smart. So these are trainings for early and mid-career professionals on negotiating for salaries, benefits, and advancement opportunities. The second is AAUW Start Smart. Now that's the one that's specifically designed for college women before they enter the job market. And it's really important because it teaches them effective salary negotiation techniques. It really helps to boost their confidence and their negotiation skills. So that the first time, so that when they have a conversation with an employer, it's not the first time that they have been exposed to salary and questions about their earnings and their competency. And also to boost financial education, we actually offer an additional course called AAUW Money Smart. So, Money Smart is aimed at providing all women with the personal finance information that they need to strengthen their financial security. And one of the reasons that we started Money Smart was because we found that throughout our trainings, that individuals who were about to negotiate a salary or needed those skills actually didn't know some basic information about budgeting and about how they should be planning their finances. So Money Smart has stepped in and filled that gap. At AEW, we know that negotiating is an important skill to develop. It increases the potential to earn more, and it can make the difference for paying off those student loans, supporting your family, increasing purchasing power, and really saving for a solid future. Individuals who go through our salary negotiation programs provide in just incredible feedback and incredible testimonies about the value that the trainings have to their ability to really negotiate a fair salary. So we're very proud of that.
Well, the programs are incredible. The training's incredible, and I highly encourage our listeners to avail themselves right to the training. To your point, the Start Smart program, I think from my perspective is such an important one. McKinsey talks about the broken rung on the ladder a lot. In my experience, I kind of think the ladder is not even on even ground, right? So it's not about a broken rung, it's about not even starting at the same spot. And then it's nearly impossible, right, to get ahead unless we leapfrog, right? Which some of us have been so fortunate to do. But that opportunity to teach young women their worth, right? Going into a discussion and to empower them to have those conversations that their male counterparts don't shy away from. Like it's beautiful work, and I know you're changing the world, right? One educated woman at a time. So thank you. But in addition to all that education, AAUW is also addressing the wage gap issue systemically. You're collaborating with public officials in Washington, D.C. on pay equity initiatives, right? Can you tell us more about these efforts and how they're helping? What kind of progress we're making?
Sure, because it is important that we lift up the fact, as you say, that despite the efforts of individual women to negotiate and become more financially empowered, the fact remains that the gender pay gap is sizable. It is significantly worse for women of color, and it's not going to go away on its own, which is why policy intervention is needed. At the federal level, one of AAUW's priorities has been to advocate for rigorous enforcement and strengthening of the Equal Pay Act. Unfortunately, we haven't seen much movement at the federal level on this, and obviously, we have grave concerns about some of the recent executive orders which encourage the private sector to not take affirmative steps to ensure equal access and opportunity for people. We are also urging the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the EEOC, to reinstate paid data collection from employers. Recently, the EEOC has pulled back some reporting requirements. However, having information about earnings and hours worked by pay band, as well as sex, race, ethnicity, and job category, really do play an important role in uncovering and combating pay discrimination, a crucial factor in the gender wage gap. So this information helps lawmakers and workers who want to exercise their rights and enjoy equal and merit-based employment opportunities. But on a positive note, to end, we are seeing some bipartisan support in Congress for expanding paid leave to more employees. That's a good step in the right direction.
Absolutely.
Because not having to choose between fulfilling your work responsibilities with having to care for a sick child or to take time for your own medical care would certainly have a significant positive impact for parents and caregivers. We've also seen states taking the lead on a variety of laws to address the gender pay gap, and we really see that as a promising trend moving forward.
Well, I am thrilled to have good news, any kind of good news today, as we visited on earlier. And, as we discussed earlier, right, this new research, our 2024 Economic Issues for Women in Texas report, does highlight the role that women play in driving growth and innovation here in Texas. Now, to support our efforts in amplifying this message, we are developing a mini report tailored for corporate partners, business partners, right, the business community, providing them with resources to help address some of the challenges that specifically face women here in Texas. So from your experience and expertise, what equitable workforce policies would you recommend including, right, and sharing with corporate leaders who are tuning in today or who will receive our forthcoming report?
It's so important, and I'm so happy to lift up a few of the really, really important equitable workforce policies that really should be put in place because there really are tangible steps that employers can take to foster pay equity. One way is to, first of all, conduct regular pay audits. This is something that we do at AAUW, right? We routinely conduct an audit of our own compensation practices to ensure transparency and accountability. And we also have adopted a compensation philosophy as well. I think, secondly, other ways involve eliminating the practice of using salary history to set wages. It really is a key factor in the pay gap. It perpetuates the pay gap because it assumes that the prior salaries were fairly established. Employers should instead use market research to determine the value of a position for your organization or business. An employer should also be, finally, just proactive in adopting practices and policies to encourage salary transparency. A good example is job descriptions should include salary bands and also policies that punish employees for discussing or inquiring about wages should certainly be abandoned. Because when workers believe that their employer is committed to fairness, committed to transparency, it really can improve morale. They're more likely to contribute their best efforts to their jobs. And that should be what every employer strives for across the board.
Again, everybody wins in that scenario. So thank you for sharing some of those best practices, right, that employers, corporate partners, right, really should be employing, right, as they go about their day-to-day operations. Gloria, we have enjoyed talking to you, learning more about what AAUW is doing in this space, being able to draw on the educational opportunities that and content, right, that you provide, and to support the work that you're doing nationally as we tackle our challenges here in Texas. So thank you so much for making time to be with us today. We appreciate you.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you once again for your very important research.
We invite you to learn more about our research by going to our website, txwf.org/research. There you'll also find ways you can engage with Texas Women's Foundation, share our key messages on social media, and support our mission. A very special thank you to Gloria Blackwell for joining us today and shedding light on pay inequity and, even better, ways that we can take action to help finally close the wage gap.
And thank you so much for the research that has been done. And we appreciate all of the work and advocacy that you are doing to help close the pay gap.
Thank you, Gloria. We are grateful for the support from the Dodie Frost Crockett Endowment, which is funding this podcast. Dodie has been a longtime friend and supporter of Texas Women's Foundation. Her contributions to our mission support the work that we're doing today to share these insights with a broader audience, to build a movement of champions for change. I'd also like to thank our partners at ISP Creative for helping us put this together. They're the behind-the-scenes magic. Now, make sure you tune in to hear more about the state of women in Texas in our upcoming episodes that will be released weekly. You can find them on our website, txwf.org, and on social media at Texas Women's FDN, along with ways to support our mission. Thank you for joining us as we work together to build strong women, better Texas.